The splash of icy water hit Sophia Caldwell like 1,000 needles, stealing her breath as the churning river swallowed her wedding dress. One moment she'd been standing on the riverbank with her soon-to-be husband, Vernon Holloway, and the next his hands on her back, a violent shove, and the world tipping sideways as she plunged into the raging waters of the Powder River. Spring of 1879 had brought the heaviest rainfall Wyoming Territory had seen in years. The once gentle river now roared with vengeful force, carrying Sophia downstream as her sodden wedding gown became a deadly weight. Her lungs burned as she fought to keep her head above water, her fingers clawing at nothing but rushing current. This was to be her wedding day, but Vernon, wealthy cattle baron, and the man she'd reluctantly agreed to marry to save her family's struggling ranch, had revealed his true nature when she'd confronted him about the rumors of his gambling debts and shady business dealings. "Help!" She screamed when her head broke the surface, but the rushing water drowned her voice. Her strength was fading fast, and the realization that she might die on what should have been her wedding day struck her with bitter irony. As consciousness began to slip away, Sophia felt strong arms encircle her waist, pulling her against a solid form. Through water-blurred vision, she glimpsed a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat before darkness claimed her. Quentin Blackwood had been tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on his cattle when he heard the commotion. From his position on the ridge overlooking the river, he'd witnessed the unthinkable: a man in fine clothes pushing a woman in white into the raging waters. Without hesitation, Quentin had spurred his horse downriver, following the current until he spotted the flash of white fabric in the churning water. Now, dragging the half-drowned woman to shore, Quentin laid her gently on the riverbank and pressed against her back, forcing water from her lungs. She coughed violently, expelling river water before rolling to her side, gasping for air. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're safe." Her eyes fluttered open green as summer grass and focused on his face with confusion and fear. Who she began before another coughing fit overtook her. "Name's Quentin Blackwood. Found you taking an unlikely swim." He kept his tone light, though rage simmered beneath his calm exterior. "The better question is who pushed you into that river?" Sophia's eyes widened. "You saw." Quentin nodded, his jaw tight, saw enough to know it wasn't no accident. Tears welled in her eyes as the full horror of what had happened sank in. "Vernon, my fiancé, we were to be married today." Her voice broke on the last word. "Some wedding gift," Quentin muttered, removing his duster and draping it over her trembling shoulders. "Can you stand? My cabin's not far. Need to get you warm before the chill takes hold." She nodded weakly, and he helped her to her feet. When her knees buckled, Quentin caught her effortlessly, lifting her into his arms. "I've got you, madam," he said, carrying her to where his horse waited patiently. With practiced ease, he settled her in the saddle before mounting behind her, one arm secure around her waist as he took the reins. "Sophia," she murmured, leaning back against his chest for support. "Sophia Caldwell." "Well, Miss Caldwell, let's get you somewhere safe. That man, Vernon, he'll be looking for you, I reckon." She stiffened in his arms. "He pushed me in to drown." "He won't be looking for me. He'll be expecting my body to wash up downstream, if at all." Quentin's arm tightened protectively around her waist. "Then we've got the advantage. He thinks you're dead, which means you're safe, at least for now." As they rode through the pine-covered hills toward his homestead, Quentin couldn't shake the image of the man's face, cold, calculated, watching as the woman plunged into the river. In his 15 years as a rancher in Wyoming Territory, he'd seen his share of cruelty, but there was something especially heinous about a man trying to murder his bride on their wedding day. Sophia slipped in and out of consciousness during the ride, her body occasionally shaking with violent tremors. By the time they reached his cabin, a sturdy two-room structure nestled in a protected valley, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land. Quentin's ranch hands, Pedro and Jacob, rushed forward when they saw their boss returning with an unconscious woman in his arms. "Boss, what happened?" Jacob asked, reaching up to help ease Sophia down from the horse, found her in the river. "Someone tried to drown her," Quentin explained tersely. Need to get her warm. Pedro, heat water for a bath. Jacob, find some dry clothes, maybe something of my sister's from when she visited last summer. The men hurried to comply while Quentin carried Sophia into the cabin and laid her gently on his bed. Her wedding dress, once white and elegant, now hung in tatters, stained with river mud and torn by rocks. Her face was pale, lips tinged with blue, but she was breathing steadily. Within the hour, Pedro's wife, Maria, had arrived to help. She shooed the men from the room and tended to Sophia, bathing her and dressing her in the clean, dry clothes Jacob had found. The poor angel, Maria said when she emerged from the bedroom. Who would do such a thing? Her fiancé, Quentin replied, his voice hard. They were to be married today. Maria crossed herself. Dios mío, she is lucky you found her, Quentin. Will she be all right? He asked, concern etching lines around his eyes. She is strong, but she needs rest and warmth. The fever may come. Maria patted his arm. I will stay tonight to watch over her. Quentin nodded gratefully. Thank you, Maria. I need to see to something. Tell Pedro to keep watch over the property. That man might come looking when he realizes she didn't drown. Saddling a fresh horse, Quentin rode back toward town as night fell. He needed to know more about this Vernon, needed to understand what kind of man would murder his bride. In Clearwater, the small settlement that served as the nearest town to his ranch, Quentin tied his horse outside the saloon and pushed through the batwing doors. The usual Friday night crowd was in full swing, the piano player banging out a lively tune while miners and cowboys drank away their week's earnings. Quentin made his way to the bar where Horace, the bartender and owner, was polishing glasses. Evening, Quentin. Rare to see you in town on a Friday, Horace remarked, setting down a whiskey without being asked. Need information, Horace, about a wedding that was supposed to happen today. Groom named Vernon. Horace's bushy eyebrows rose. Vernon Holloway, sure, whole town's been talking about it. He was set to marry the Caldwell girl. Desperate arrangement, if you ask me. Old man Caldwell's been struggling since that drought killed half his herd. Holloway offered to save the ranch if the daughter would marry him. The bartender leaned closer. Word is, the bride never showed up. Holloway's been here drinking since noon, telling anyone who will listen that she got cold feet. Quentin's hand tightened around his glass. Where is he now? Horace jerked his head toward a corner table where a well-dressed man sat alone, a bottle of expensive bourbon at his elbow. Vernon Holloway's fine suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, but even in his disheveled state, his air of wealth and privilege was unmistakable. Much obliged, Quentin said, sliding a coin across the bar. He picked up his whiskey and made his way to Holloway's table, settling into the chair opposite without invitation. Vernon looked up, irritation flashing across his face. This seat is taken. Seems empty to me, Quentin replied evenly, taking a slow sip of his drink. Do I know you? Vernon asked, his words slightly slurred. No, but I know you. Vernon Holloway, the man whose bride went missing today. Vernon's eyes narrowed. What's it to you, cowboy? Just curious about a man who'd tell the town his bride got cold feet when he knows damn well he pushed her into the Powder River to drown. The color drained from Vernon's face, replaced quickly by a flush of anger. That's a damned lie. Who are you? Someone who saw what you did, Quentin said, his voice deadly quiet. Someone who fished that poor woman out of the river before she drowned. Vernon's hand moved toward his jacket, but Quentin was faster, catching his wrist in an iron grip. I wouldn't, Quentin warned. Now I'm curious why try to kill your bride on your wedding day. Vernon's eyes darted around the saloon, checking if anyone was listening to their conversation. The music and chatter provided enough cover for their words. You can't prove anything, Vernon hissed. And if she survived, where is she? Why hasn't she come forward with these wild accusations? Maybe she's smart enough to stay away from a man who tried to murder her, Quentin suggested. Or maybe she's waiting for the right moment. Either way, I'm putting you on notice, Holloway. I know what you did, and I won't let you hurt her again. Vernon's expression hardened. You have no idea who you're dealing with, cowboy. I own half this territory. One word from me and you'll lose everything you have. Quentin smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Threats don't work well on a man with nothing to lose. Stay away from Sophia Caldwell, or next time it'll be you taking a swim in the Powder River." He stood, downing the last of his whiskey before walking away, feeling Vernon's hateful gaze boring into his back. Outside, Quentin took a deep breath of the cool night air. Vernon Holloway was dangerous, that much was clear, and he wouldn't take this interference lightly. Quentin would need to be vigilant. When he returned to the ranch, Maria met him at the door. "She's awake," she said softly. "The fever has started, but she's lucid. She's been asking for you." Quentin nodded, removing his hat as he entered the bedroom. Sophia was propped up against pillows, her damp hair brushed back from her forehead. The borrowed nightgown was too large for her slight frame, making her appear even more vulnerable. Despite her ordeal, there was a quiet strength in her gaze as she watched him approach. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted, her voice hoarse. "Miss Caldwell, how are you feeling?" "Like I fought the river and barely won," she replied with a weak smile. "Thanks to you." He pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. "You remember what happened?" She nodded, her smile fading. "Vernon and I were walking by the river. I'd heard rumors about his business dealings, that he'd lost a significant amount of money gambling and was deeply in debt. I confronted him, told him I couldn't marry a man I couldn't trust." Her hands twisted in the blanket. He became enraged. "Said no one spoke to him that way, especially not a woman. Then he pushed me. The last thing I remember is the cold water and thinking that I was going to die on my wedding day." "You're safe now," Quentin assured her, "but you should know I went to town." "Holloway's telling everyone you got cold feet, that you ran away before the ceremony." Sophia's laugh was bitter. "Of course he is. Who would suspect the charming, wealthy Vernon Holloway of attempted murder?" Her expression sobered. "My family, they must be worried sick." "Your parents are at the Rocking Sea Ranch south of town," she nodded. "My father, James Caldwell, he arranged the marriage to save our ranch. Vernon offered to pay off our debts in exchange for my hand." Tears welled in her eyes. "Father would never have agreed if he'd known what kind of man Vernon truly is." "I'll send word to them tomorrow," Quentin promised. "Discreetly, we need to be careful. Holloway has influence in these parts." Sophia reached out impulsively, her fingers closing around his wrist. "Thank you for saving my life, for bringing me here. I'm a stranger to you, yet you've risked so much." Quentin felt an unexpected warmth at her touch. "Get some rest, Miss Caldwell. You're safe here for as long as you need." As he moved to leave, she called after him, "Quentin, when you send word to my family, tell them I'm alive, but don't tell them where I am. Not yet. Vernon has my father convinced he's our salvation. I need to think about how to handle this." He nodded, understanding her caution. Vernon Holloway was not a man to be underestimated, and until they understood the full extent of his influence, Sophia was safest if her location remained unknown. That night, as Quentin made a bed for himself by the fireplace in the main room, he found himself unable to sleep. The image of Sophia's face, as she thanked him, kept returning to his mind. There was something about her, a resilience beneath her genteel exterior, that stirred feelings he thought long buried. After losing his wife and infant son to fever 5 years ago, Quentin had thrown himself into building his ranch, determined never to risk his heart again. Yet here he was, lying awake thinking about a woman he barely knew, a woman who had almost died today, a woman who was now sleeping in his bed while he stared at the ceiling. With a sigh, he rolled onto his side and closed his eyes, willing sleep to come. Tomorrow would bring complications enough without adding his unsettled feelings to the mix. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, Quentin saddled his horse and rode to the neighboring property where his closest friend, William Tucker, ran a small horse breeding operation. Will had fought alongside Quentin in the final year of the Civil War and had followed him west afterward, seeking the same fresh start Quentin had craved. "Need a favor," Quentin said after explaining the situation. "Need you to get word to James Caldwell that his daughter is alive and safe, but don't tell him where she is, and watch for any of Holloway's men asking questions." Will nodded, his weathered face serious. "Sounds like you've stepped in it this time, Quinn. Holloway's not a man to cross lightly. Didn't give me much choice when he tried to drown his bride." Quentin replied grimly. Fair enough, I'll ride to the Caldwell place today. What's your plan after that? Quentin ran a hand through his hair. Haven't thought that far ahead. Keep her safe until we figure out what Holloway's game is, I suppose. Will's eyes twinkled. Pretty young woman staying at your place. People will talk. Let them, Quentin said dismissively, though the thought had already occurred to him. A single man housing an unmarried woman would certainly cause gossip, but Sophia's safety was more important than his reputation. When he returned to the cabin, he found Sophia sitting at the kitchen table, dressed in a simple blue dress that must have belonged to his sister. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and though she still looked pale, some color had returned to her cheeks. You look better, he observed, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Your friend Maria is a miracle worker, Sophia replied with a small smile. She brought the dress and helped me with my hair, said she'd return later with some soup. She hesitated. I don't want to be a burden, Quentin. Once I'm stronger, I'll find somewhere else to go. No need, he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. You're welcome here until we sort this out. I've sent word to your father that you're safe. Relief washed over her face. Thank you, I've been so worried about them. Vernon is persuasive. I fear what lies he might tell them. Your father's no fool, I imagine, Quentin said, sitting across from her. Sophia's expression clouded. No, but he's desperate. Our ranch has been struggling since the drought 2 years ago. Vernon's offer seemed like salvation. She looked down at her hands. I agreed to the marriage for my family's sake, even though I never loved him. I thought he was at least an honorable man until I heard whispers about his gambling debts and how he'd cheated several business partners. When did you confront him? Yesterday morning. He came to the ranch early, said he wanted to walk by the river before the ceremony. Her voice faltered. I thought it was romantic at the time. I decided to be honest, to tell him what I'd heard and give him a chance to explain. He changed when I questioned him. It was like watching a mask slip away, revealing something cold and cruel underneath. Quentin's hand tightened around his coffee cup. A man like that won't give up easily. He'll want to silence you permanently now that you know his secrets. Fear flickered in her eyes. What do I do? I can't hide forever. First you heal, Quentin said firmly. Then we gather evidence of his wrongdoing. There must be others he's cheated or threatened. If we can prove he's a criminal, his influence won't protect him. Sophia nodded slowly. There's a ledger in his study at his home. I saw him hiding it one day when I visited with my father. He was very secretive about it, if it contains records of his illegal dealings. Getting into Holloway's house won't be easy, Quentin mused, but it's a start. Over the next few days, Sophia gradually regained her strength. The fever broke and color returned to her cheeks. She insisted on helping around the cabin, cooking meals with Maria's guidance and mending some of Quentin's shirts that had been awaiting attention. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking about their lives. Quentin told her about growing up in Virginia, about fighting for the Union despite his Southern roots, about coming west to start over after the war. He spoke of his wife, Emma, and their son, who had lived barely 3 months before the fever took them both. Sophia listened with compassionate eyes, offering neither pity nor platitudes, just understanding. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood on the rocking sea, of learning to ride before she could walk, of her mother's death when she was 16, and how she'd taken over running the household for her father and younger brother, Samuel. She spoke of her dreams of traveling to San Francisco or even New York someday, of seeing the ocean and the tall buildings she'd only read about in books. On the 4th day, Will returned with news. He'd spoken with James Caldwell, who had been frantic with worry. Holloway's got the sheriff looking for you, Will reported as they sat around the kitchen table. Claiming you stole family heirlooms before running off. Your father didn't believe it for a second, but he's in a tight spot. Holloway's threatening to call in the loans he's made to your father if you don't turn up. Sophia paled. He'll ruin my family. Your father said to tell you he doesn't care about the ranch, Will continued gently. He just wants to know you're safe. Said to remember that land can be replaced, but daughters can't. Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks. That sounds like him, but I can't let Vernon destroy everything my family has built over generations. Quentin reached across the table, covering her hand with his. We won't let that happen. But rushing back without a plan would be foolish. Holloway tried to kill you once, he won't hesitate to try again. We need that ledger, Sophia said, wiping away her tears with determination. If it contains what I think it does, it could expose him. Will leaned forward. I might be able to help with that. My cousin Eliza works as a maid in Holloway's house. She could get access. Hope flickered in Sophia's eyes. Could she, without risking herself? Eliza's smarter than most give her credit for, Will assured her, and she's no fan of Holloway. Says he treats the staff like they're beneath him. Quentin nodded. It's worth a try. Can you speak with her, Will? I'll ride to town tomorrow, Will promised. But even if we get the ledger, we'll need to be careful how we use it. Holloway has the sheriff in his pocket, and Judge Parker owes him for financing his last campaign. The federal marshal, Quentin suggested. Marshal Davis is beyond Holloway's influence if we can get solid evidence to him. That could work, Will agreed. Davis is as honest as they come. As Will departed, Sophia stood on the porch beside Quentin, watching his friend ride away. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, transforming the rugged terrain into something almost magical. It's beautiful here, she said softly, so different from our ranch. We're in the valley, but you can see for miles up here. Quentin glanced down at her, struck by how the sunset light caught in her hair, turning the brown strands to copper. It's why I chose this spot. Reminds me there's a bigger world out there. Sophia turned to face him, her expression serious. I'm grateful, Quentin, not just for saving me from the river, but for everything since. For believing me, for helping me. Anyone would have done the same, he said, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. She shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. No, they wouldn't have. Most men would have taken me back to town, back to Vernon. They would have believed his story over mine. Well, most men didn't see him push you into that river, Quentin replied, trying to lighten the moment. Even so, she stepped closer, her hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. Thank you. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through him, and for a moment, Quentin found himself lost in her eyes, those remarkable green eyes that had first looked up at him from the riverbank, filled with confusion and fear, now regarding him with something that made his heart beat faster. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a horse approaching. Quentin tensed, automatically moving to place himself between Sophia and potential danger. Get inside, he said quietly. Sophia hesitated only briefly before complying, slipping through the door as Quentin reached for the rifle he kept mounted beside it. He stepped off the porch, rifle ready but not raised, as the rider came into view. Relief washed over him as he recognized Pedro returning from town with supplies. But his relief was short-lived when he saw the grave expression on his ranch hand's face. Boss, Pedro called as he dismounted. Trouble in town. Holloway's offering a reward for information about Miss Caldwell, $500. And he's hired gunmen, 3 of them, asking questions all over the county. Quentin's jaw tightened. Anyone talking? Pedro shook his head. Not yet, but that's a lot of money, and the gunmen, they're not local. One of them, they call him the Texan, has a reputation. I know of him, Quentin said grimly. The Texan was a notorious hired gun who had killed more men than anyone could count. If Holloway had brought him in, the situation was escalating dangerously. Inside, he found Sophia standing by the window, her face pale. I heard, she said. He's hired killers to find me. We always knew he wouldn't give up easily, Quentin reminded her, setting his rifle aside. But this changes nothing. You're still safest here until we can expose him. But now I'm putting you and your people in danger too, she argued. These men, they'll kill anyone who stands in their way. Quentin crossed to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. Sophia, listen to me. I've dealt with men like this before. My ranch hands are loyal and they know how to defend themselves, and I'm not exactly helpless. She searched his face, worry etched in her features. Why are you doing this? Risking so much for someone you barely know? The question caught him off guard. Why was he so invested in protecting her? Yes, he'd witnessed a crime and couldn't stand by while an innocent woman was harmed, but there was more to it than that. In the few days Sophia had been at his ranch, something had changed. The cabin felt less empty, the days less lonely. Her presence had awakened feelings he'd thought long dead. "Because it's the right thing to do," he answered simply, unwilling to examine his motivations too closely. "Now we need to be more careful. No riding out, no visitors except Will. We'll wait for news about the ledger and then decide our next move." That night, after Sophia had retired to the bedroom, Quentin sat cleaning his firearms by the fire. The familiar ritual usually calmed his mind, but tonight his thoughts were troubled. The Texans' involvement raised the stakes considerably. If Holloway was willing to hire a notorious killer, what else might he do? A soft noise drew his attention to the bedroom doorway where Sophia stood, wrapped in a blanket against the night chill. "Can't sleep?" he asked, setting aside the revolver he'd been oiling. She shook her head, moving to sit in the chair opposite him. "Every time I close my eyes, I feel the river closing over me again." Her voice was steady, but he could see the lingering fear in her eyes. "That'll pass with time," he said gently. "The mind heals slower than the body sometimes." Sophia pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I keep thinking about what Vernon must be telling people, that I'm a thief, a runaway bride who humiliated him. Even if we expose his crimes, my reputation will be ruined." "Reputations can be rebuilt," Quentin pointed out. "And the truth has a way of coming out eventually." "Is that what happened for you?" she asked. "After you came west, did you find the fresh start you were looking for?" He considered the question, poking at the fire with an iron. "In some ways. Built something that's mine, made a life that feels honest. But the past doesn't disappear just because you ride 1,000 miles from it." "What were you running from?" Her question was soft, without judgment. Quentin was silent for a long moment. He rarely spoke of his past, even to Will, who had shared much of it. But something about Sophia's quiet presence in the firelight made the words come easier. "After Emma and my son died, I couldn't stay in that house, that town. Everything reminded me of them. But it was more than grief driving me west." He met her eyes across the flames. "During the war, I killed men, not in battle. That was different. I was a scout, sometimes working behind enemy lines. Did things I'm not proud of, things that haunt me still." "War forces terrible choices," Sophia said, her voice gentle. "Does it excuse them?" he asked. "I've asked myself that 1,000 times, found no answer yet." She leaned forward, her face earnest in the firelight. "The man who pulled me from the river, who's risking everything to protect me, that's who you are, Quentin. Whatever you did during the war, that's not all of you." Her words touched something deep within him, a wound long festering, finally exposed to healing air. They sat in companionable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers, each lost in their own thoughts, but somehow less alone than before. The next morning brought fresh anxiety when one of Quentin's cowhands reported seeing riders near the northern boundary of the property. "Could be Holloway's men," Quentin told Sophia as he checked his rifle, "or could be nothing. Either way, I need to ride out and see." "Let me come with you," she urged. "I've been cooped up in this cabin for days. I'm a good rider and I know how to stay out of sight." He started to refuse, then reconsidered. If trouble was coming, perhaps it was better to have her with him than alone at the cabin. "Stay close and do exactly as I say," he agreed reluctantly. They rode out together, Sophia on his sister's gentle mare, following game trails through the wooded hills that formed the backbone of Quentin's property. The spring air was crisp, scented with pine and wildflowers, and despite the potential danger, Sophia's face glowed with the simple pleasure of being outdoors again. They reached a high ridge that overlooked much of the surrounding territory. Quentin dismounted and helped Sophia down, then led her to a vantage point behind some rocks. "There," he said, pointing to 3 riders moving slowly along the valley floor below. "Those aren't my men." Sophia tensed beside him. "Can you see who they are?" Quentin narrowed his eyes. "The one in front, tall man with the black hat, that could be the Texan. Don't recognize the others." "What are they doing?" "Searching, looking for signs, tracks." He turned to her, his expression grave. "They're tracking and they're good at it. We need to move." As they remounted, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree just above Quentin's head. Instantly, he spurred his horse forward, reaching across to grab Sophia's reins. "Ride," he shouted, leading them into the dense forest as more shots echoed behind them. They raced through the trees, branches whipping past as they followed a narrow deer trail that only Quentin knew. Behind them, he could hear shouts and the thunder of pursuing hooves. Sophia kept pace beside him, her face set with determination despite the fear in her eyes. The trail took a sharp turn, descending steeply into a ravine. At the bottom, a small stream rushed between moss-covered rocks. Quentin pulled up sharply. "Dismount," he ordered. "Quickly." Sophia slid from her saddle, watching in confusion as Quentin led both horses into the stream. "We'll follow the water," he explained. "It'll hide our tracks. The horses' water doesn't hold scent well." They waded upstream, leading the horses through the shallow water for nearly half a mile before Quentin guided them out onto a rocky shelf where they would leave no prints. From there, they climbed a steep slope to another deer trail that would eventually circle back toward the cabin from an unexpected direction. "You know these woods well," Sophia observed as they paused to listen for pursuers. "Had 5 years to learn every inch," Quentin replied. "Those men are good, but they're not local. That gives us an advantage." They continued on foot, leading the horses through terrain too treacherous to ride. The day wore on, the sun moving across the sky as they took a circuitous route back toward the ranch. Occasionally they would stop, listening for signs of pursuit, but the forest remained quiet except for the natural sounds of birds and wind in the pines. It was late afternoon when they finally emerged from the trees within sight of the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney and Quentin could see Pedro standing guard on the porch, rifle in hand. "Looks clear," he said, helping Sophia remount for the final approach. "But they know we're here now. They'll be back and with more men." Sophia's face was grim as she looked toward the cabin that had been her sanctuary. "I've brought this danger to your door, Quentin. I should leave, draw them away from you and your people. And go where?" he challenged. "Holloway's men would run you down before you reach the next county." "No, we stick to the plan. Wait for word about the ledger, then take whatever evidence we find to Marshal Davis." Inside, they found Will waiting with news. His cousin Eliza had agreed to search for the ledger, but it would take time to find the right opportunity. "Holloway's rarely out of the house these days," Will reported, "and when he leaves, he locks his study. Eliza says he's been drinking heavily and flying into rages, firing 2 servants already this week." "He's unraveling," Sophia said. "That's good, he might make mistakes. But it also makes him more dangerous." "We'll need to fortify the ranch," Quentin decided. "Double the watch, bring the hands in closer to the house." "Will, can you stay?" His friend nodded. "Already sent word to my foreman, he'll handle things at my place." That night, Quentin drew up plans to defend the property. The cabin itself was sturdy, built of thick logs with small windows that could be easily defended. The barn and corral were more vulnerable, but with his 7 ranch hands plus Will, they could establish a defensive perimeter. Sophia insisted on taking part in the planning. "I can shoot," she informed them when Quentin hesitated to include her. "My father made sure of it. Every woman on a frontier ranch needs to know how to defend herself." "She's right," Will said with a grin. "Can't keep her locked in the bedroom if trouble comes." Quentin conceded the point, and Sophia proved her worth immediately, suggesting strategic positions that utilized the natural features of the landscape. Her practical intelligence impressed not just Quentin but his men as well, who stopped treating her as a helpless lady in distress and began to include her naturally in their conversations. As the days passed, a tense waiting game ensued. Riders were spotted occasionally on the boundaries of the property but made no move to approach. Quentin's men took turns keeping watch, and no one traveled alone. The spring roundup was delayed, but the cattle could wait. Safety came first. During this time, Quentin found himself increasingly drawn to Sophia. Her courage in the face of danger, her quick mind, and her gentle humor created a connection he hadn't expected. He caught himself watching her as she helped Maria with the cooking or joined the men for target practice, proving herself a better shot than most. At night, Their conversations by the fire grew deeper, more personal, as the barriers between them gradually fell away. One evening, a week after the encounter with the trackers, Quentin found Sophia sitting alone on the porch, gazing at the stars. He sat beside her, offering her a cup of coffee, which she accepted with a smile. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "I was thinking about choices," she replied. "How one decision can change everything. If I hadn't confronted Vernon that day by the river, you might be married to a criminal who would have made your life miserable," Quentin finished. "Sometimes the hardest path is the right one." She turned to look at him, her face silvered by moonlight. "I never thanked you properly for refusing to take me back to him. Many men would have, thinking it was the proper thing to do." "I saw what he did," Quentin reminded her. "No decent man would return a woman to someone who tried to kill her." "Still," she persisted, "you've risked everything for me. Your ranch, your safety, your men. Why?" The question hung between them, demanding an honest answer. Quentin set his coffee aside and took her hand in his, surprising himself with the gesture. "At first, it was simple. I couldn't stand by and let an innocent person come to harm. But now—" He paused, searching for words to express feelings he was only beginning to understand. "Now, I can't imagine you not being here. These past days, despite the danger, despite everything, they've meant something to me, Sophia." Her fingers tightened around his. "They've meant something to me too," she whispered. "More than I can say." The confession hung in the air between them, neither willing to take the next step, yet both aware that something had fundamentally changed. They sat in silence, hands entwined, until the night chill finally drove them inside. The next morning, Will rode in with crucial news. Eliza had found the ledger, hidden in a false bottom of Holloway's desk drawer. She couldn't take it, but she'd managed to copy several pages that detailed loans with exorbitant interest rates, payoffs to officials, and evidence of claim jumping on several mining operations. "This is it," Sophia said excitedly as they examined the copied pages spread across the kitchen table. "This proves Vernon has been running a criminal operation. The judge he bribed, the miners he cheated, it's all here." "It's enough to take to Marshal Davis," Will agreed. "But getting to him won't be easy. Holloway's men are watching the roads." "I'll go," Quentin decided. "Tonight, under cover of darkness. The marshal's office is in Cheyenne. I can be there and back in 3 days if I ride hard." "Not alone," Sophia objected. "It's too dangerous. And these are my family's problems. I should be the one to go." "You're the one they're looking for," Quentin pointed out, "and you're the witness to attempted murder. You need to stay hidden until the marshal can act on this evidence." Will cleared his throat. "Actually, I think both of you should go. Pedro and the boys can defend the ranch if needed, but having you both here is like leaving bait in a trap. Better to be moving targets than sitting ones." Quentin considered the suggestion. Will had a point. If they stayed, Holloway's men would eventually mount a full assault on the ranch, endangering everyone. On the road, they at least had the advantage of mobility. "All right," he conceded. "We leave at nightfall, light packs, fast horses. Will, you head back to your place. No sense in you being caught in the middle of this." As they prepared for the journey, Sophia moved with quiet efficiency, packing only essentials. Quentin noticed she had adapted quickly to ranch life, abandoning the formal mannerisms of a society lady for the practical ways of the frontier. Her borrowed clothes, simple shirts, and riding skirts suited her far better than the elaborate wedding dress had. "You look at home here," he observed as she rolled blankets into tight bundles. She glanced up, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "I feel at home here," she admitted. "More than I ever did at society functions or dinner parties. This life, it has a honesty to it that I've always craved." Her words stirred something in Quentin, a hope he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. But now was not the time for such thoughts. First, they needed to survive the journey to Cheyenne and back. They departed as planned, riding out under a clouded moon that provided just enough light to follow the trail without making them easy targets. Quentin led them south initially, away from the main road, planning to circle around and approach Cheyenne from an unexpected direction. The night was cool but not uncomfortable, the spring air fragrant with sage and new growth. They rode in silence for the most part, alert for any sound that might indicate pursuit. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles and reached a small stand of cottonwoods beside a creek, a good place to rest during daylight hours. "We'll stay here until dusk," Quentin said as they dismounted. "Less chance of being spotted." They settled beneath the trees, eating cold biscuits and jerky from their packs. Sophia leaned back against a tree trunk, fatigue evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Try to sleep," Quentin urged. "I'll keep watch." She nodded gratefully, wrapping herself in a blanket and closing her eyes. Quentin watched as her breathing deepened and her features relaxed in sleep. In repose, she looked younger, the worry lines around her mouth softening. A strand of hair had fallen across her cheek, and he resisted the urge to brush it away, not wanting to disturb her well-earned rest. Instead, he checked his weapons and surveyed their surroundings, mentally planning the next leg of their journey. If they continued at this pace, they could reach Cheyenne by the following evening. Marshal Davis was a fair man who would take their evidence seriously, especially with Sophia's testimony about the attempted murder. The day passed slowly. Quentin dozed briefly during the afternoon while Sophia kept watch, but mostly they waited, speaking little to avoid drawing attention. As the sun began to set, they prepared to continue their journey. They had just mounted when Quentin heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching from the north. "Ride," he said tersely. "Now." They spurred their horses forward, breaking from the cover of the trees into open country. Behind them, shouts confirmed what Quentin had feared: they'd been spotted. "This way," he called, veering sharply east toward a line of hills. If they could reach the broken country beyond, they might lose their pursuers in the maze of gullies and ravines. Bullets whined past them as they rode, but the distance was still too great for accurate shooting. Sophia kept pace beside him, bent low over her horse's neck, her face set with determination. They raced across the open plain, the thundering hooves of their pursuers growing louder with each passing minute. The hills loomed closer, offering tantalizing promise of safety, but their horses were tiring. Quentin's mount, a sturdy bay gelding, was breathing hard, foam flecking its neck. Sophia's mare was faring even worse, beginning to lag despite her urgent commands. "They're gaining," she called, glancing over her shoulder. Quentin made a swift decision. "There," he pointed to a narrow canyon entrance ahead. "We'll make a stand there, better ground." They reached the canyon just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that might work to their advantage. Dismounting quickly, they led the exhausted horses deeper into the canyon before tying them in a protected alcove. "4 men," Quentin said as he checked his rifle. "Maybe 5. The Texan will be leading them." Sophia drew her revolver, checking that all chambers were loaded. "How do you want to play this?" "High ground," he replied, pointing to a rocky outcropping that overlooked the canyon entrance. "I'll take position there. You stay with the horses, cover the back in case they try to circle around." She nodded, but before they separated, she caught his arm. "Quentin," she said softly, "be careful." The concern in her eyes warmed him even in this dangerous moment. "You too." He scrambled up the rocky slope to the position he'd chosen, settling behind a large boulder that offered both cover and a clear view of the canyon entrance. Below, he could see Sophia taking position among some rocks near the horses, her revolver ready. The wait was brief. As twilight deepened into dusk, 5 riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon, moving cautiously forward. Quentin recognized the Texan in the lead, a tall man with a distinctive black hat and a long duster. The others were typical hired guns, hard-faced men who killed for money without asking questions. Quentin took aim at the Texan and fired. The shot echoed through the canyon, startling birds from their roosts. The Texan's horse reared as the bullet struck rock inches from its rider's head. Instantly, the gunmen scattered, taking cover behind boulders at the canyon entrance. "Blackwood," the Texan called. "We know you're in there with the Caldwell woman. There's no way out." Quentin remained silent, changing positions slightly to avoid giving away his location. A shot rang out from below Sophia, firing at a man who had tried to advance. The bullet found its mark, and the gunman fell with a cry, clutching his leg. "You're outnumbered," the Texan continued. "Holloway's offering $1,000 for the woman, dead or alive." "You can ride away from this, Blackwood. This isn't your fight." "Made it my fight when Holloway tried to drown his bride," Quentin called back, firing again to keep the men pinned down. An exchange of gunfire followed, bullets ricocheting off rocks and kicking up dust. Quentin moved after each shot, making himself a difficult target. From her position, Sophia maintained steady fire, proving herself as capable in battle as she had claimed. The standoff continued as darkness fell completely. The gunmen were reluctant to rush the canyon in the face of such determined defense, but they showed no signs of withdrawing. As the moon rose, casting pale light into the canyon, Quentin realized they were at an impasse. Their ammunition wouldn't last forever, and eventually the gunmen might bring in reinforcements. A movement to his right caught his attention. Sophia, climbing carefully up to join him. "What are you doing?" he whispered as she settled beside him. "You were supposed to guard the rear." "They're not trying to circle around," she replied softly. "They're waiting us out, and I had an idea," she explained quickly. The canyon they were in connected to another that led south. She had scouted it while watching the rear. If one of them created a diversion, the other could lead the horses through the back way and escape. "You go," Quentin said immediately. "I'll hold them here, give you time to get clear." Sophia shook her head firmly. "No, I'm the better shot at close range." "You're stronger and can travel faster with the evidence. If one of us has to reach the marshal, it should be you." "I'm not leaving you to face these men alone," he protested. "You're not," she insisted. "I'm choosing to stay. This is my fight, Quentin. Vernon tried to kill me, threatened my family. Let me do this." He stared at her in the moonlight, seeing the determination in her eyes, the strength in her jaw. She wasn't asking permission, she was telling him her decision. "I'll come back for you," he promised, "with the marshal and his deputies." "I know you will," she touched his face gently. "Now go, while they're still cautious. I'll start making noise in about 5 minutes, make it count." Before he could argue further, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a brief, fierce kiss that said everything words couldn't. Then she pulled back, her expression resolute. "Go," she whispered. Heart pounding from more than just danger, Quentin made his way back down to where the horses waited. He worked quickly, transferring the copied ledger pages to his saddlebags and preparing both animals to travel. True to her word, 5 minutes later, Sophia began firing rapidly from the outcropping, moving between positions to give the impression of multiple defenders. The gunmen returned fire, focusing their attention on the upper rocks where Sophia was creating her diversion. Under cover of the gunfire, Quentin led the horses through the narrow back passage Sophia had discovered, emerging into a connecting canyon that twisted south toward the plains. Once clear of the immediate danger, he mounted his gelding and led Sophia's mare, setting a fast pace through the moonlit landscape. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to not leave Sophia facing those killers alone, but he forced himself to continue. Their best hope now was to reach Marshal Davis quickly and return with the law on their side. He rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as he dared. By dawn, he had covered significant ground, the hills giving way to rolling prairie. He allowed the exhausted animals a brief rest by a stream, but his own rest was fitful, his mind filled with images of Sophia facing down the Texan and his men. The second day of travel was grueling. The spring sun beat down mercilessly, and Quentin's lack of sleep began to take its toll. He found himself nodding in the saddle, jerking awake with his hand automatically reaching for his revolver. Only thoughts of Sophia kept him moving forward when his body demanded rest. As twilight approached on the second day, the distant buildings of Cheyenne appeared on the horizon. The territorial capital was a bustling town, with the railroad bringing new settlers and businesses daily. Quentin rode directly to the federal marshal's office, a sturdy brick building near the courthouse. Marshal Robert Davis was working late, reviewing wanted posters at his desk when Quentin burst in, trail-worn and exhausted but determined. "Marshal Davis," he began without preamble. My name is Quentin Blackwood. I have evidence of serious crimes committed by Vernon Holloway, including attempted murder and corruption of officials. Davis, a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, studied him carefully. Holloway, the cattle baron, those are serious allegations, Mr. Blackwood. I have documentation, Quentin said, placing the copied ledger pages on the desk. And a witness, Sophia Caldwell, Holloway's fiancé. He tried to drown her in the Powder River on their wedding day when she confronted him about his illegal dealings. As Davis examined the pages, his expression grew increasingly grim. Where is Miss Caldwell now? Quentin's face tightened. She's holding off Holloway's hired guns in a canyon about 40 miles north of here. We were ambushed while trying to reach you. She stayed behind to create a diversion so I could get through with the evidence. Davis stood immediately, reaching for his hat and gun belt. Johnson, he called to his deputy, round up Wilkins and Torres. We ride in 15 minutes. He turned back to Quentin. These pages show bribery of Judge Parker and Sheriff Collins, among other crimes. That puts this squarely in federal jurisdiction. Relief washed over Quentin. How soon can we leave? As soon as my men are ready and you've had something to eat, Davis said firmly. You look ready to fall from the saddle, and I need you clear-headed to guide us back to that canyon. Quentin wanted to argue, but knew the marshal was right. He accepted the food and coffee provided by the marshal's housekeeper, forcing himself to eat despite his anxiety about Sophia. Within the hour, he was riding out again with Marshal Davis and 3 deputies, all experienced lawmen who took the situation seriously. They rode through the night, Davis insisting on a pace that wouldn't kill their horses before they reached their destination. By dawn, they had covered half the distance, and by mid-afternoon of the 3rd day, they were approaching the hills where Quentin had left Sophia. As they neared the canyon, Davis signaled for caution. They dismounted and approached on foot, rifles ready. The entrance to the canyon was ominously quiet, with no sign of the gunmen who had pursued them. This way, Quentin whispered, leading them through the rocks. Inside the canyon, evidence of the gunfight remained: spent cartridges, a bloodstain where one of the gunmen had fallen, but no sign of Sophia or the Texan and his men. Fear clutched at Quentin's heart as they searched the area. Had they taken her? Was she? No, he couldn't let himself think that. Over here, called one of the deputies from the far end of the canyon. Tracks heading south. Quentin rushed to examine the sign. Multiple horses had indeed left the canyon, heading south toward Clearwater. Among the tracks was a smaller print that might have been made by Sophia's boots. They've taken her, he said grimly, probably back to Holloway. Marshal Davis nodded. Then that's where we're going, but we do this by the book, Blackwood. I have warrants to serve and we'll do it properly. They rode hard for Clearwater, reaching the town as night was falling. The streets were busy with the usual evening crowd, cowboys and miners unwinding after a day's work. Marshal Davis led them directly to the sheriff's office, where he confronted Sheriff Collins with the evidence of his corruption. Collins, a heavy-set man with a perpetual scowl, paled visibly when Davis produced the copied ledger pages showing payments from Holloway. You're relieved of duty, Collins, Davis announced. Consider yourself under arrest for corruption and obstruction of justice. With Collins secured in his own jail cell, Davis deputized several trustworthy townsmen before the group proceeded to Holloway's impressive mansion on the hill overlooking the town. Lights blazed from every window, suggesting a gathering of some kind was underway. What's happening there? Quentin asked a bystander as they rode past. Holloway's hosting a dinner, the man replied. Celebrating his upcoming wedding, they say, found his runaway bride and is wasting no time making it official. Quentin's blood ran cold. We need to move now, he urged Davis. Holloway's forcing Sophia to marry him tonight, Davis nodded grimly. We'll approach from different directions. Blackwood, you're with me at the front door. Deputies take the rear and side entrances. No one leaves, especially not Holloway. They dismounted at the ornate gates of Holloway's estate and proceeded on foot up the long drive. Music and laughter drifted from the open windows of the mansion, creating a surreal contrast to the tension Quentin felt as they approached. At the front door, Davis didn't bother knocking. He simply pushed it open and they stepped into the grand foyer where several startled servants stared at them. "Federal Marshal," Davis announced, showing his badge. "Where is Vernon Holloway?" A terrified maid pointed toward the ballroom. "In there, sir, with his guests." Davis strode purposefully toward the indicated doors, Quentin close behind. They burst into the ballroom where dozens of Clearwater's elite were gathered in formal attire. At the far end of the room, Vernon Holloway stood beside Sophia, who was dressed in a lavish gown, her face pale and her eyes defiant despite the bruise visible on her cheek. "Vernon Holloway," Davis called, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, bribery of officials, fraud, and various other charges that will be specified in court." Holloway's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. Who do you think you are, interrupting a private gathering?" "Federal Marshal Robert Davis," came the calm reply, "and this doesn't look like a dinner party to me, looks more like a forced wedding." Sophia's eyes found Quentin's across the room, relief washing over her face. She tried to step away from Holloway, but he grabbed her arm roughly. "She's my fiancé," Holloway snarled, "and a thief. She stole family heirlooms and ran away. I've been most forgiving in taking her back." "That's a lie," Sophia said clearly, her voice carrying through the room. "Vernon Holloway tried to murder me on our wedding day by pushing me into the Powder River. When I confronted him about his illegal business dealings, he attempted to silence me permanently." Murmurs spread through the assembled guests, who began to edge away from Holloway. "Lies," he shouted. "She's hysterical, confused. Who would believe such nonsense?" "I would," Quentin stepped forward. "I witnessed the whole thing, pulled her from the river myself after you walked away, thinking she was dead." "As would I," came a new voice from the crowd. A distinguished older man stepped forward, Judge Parker, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "I've seen the evidence, Holloway. Your ledger doesn't lie about the bribes you paid me and others. I've already tendered my resignation to the governor." Holloway's face drained of color as he realized his position was crumbling. With a sudden movement, he pulled Sophia against him, producing a small derringer from his jacket pocket and pressing it to her temple. "Stay back," he warned, backing toward a side door. "I'll kill her, I swear it." The room erupted in gasps and cries as guests scrambled away. Quentin and Davis held their ground, weapons ready but unwilling to risk Sophia's life. "Let her go, Holloway," Davis said calmly. "You're only making it worse for yourself." "Shut up." Holloway shouted, his composure completely shattered. "I'm leaving and she's coming with me. Anyone tries to follow, she dies." As he continued backing away, Sophia caught Quentin's eye. A silent communication passed between them: trust, determination, and something deeper. With a barely perceptible nod, Quentin acknowledged her unspoken plan. In one swift movement, Sophia drove her elbow hard into Holloway's ribs. As he gasped in pain, his grip loosened just enough for her to duck away from the gun. Quentin lunged forward, tackling Holloway to the ground as the derringer discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Deputies converged from all directions, securing Holloway as he thrashed and cursed. Quentin scrambled to his feet and rushed to Sophia, who threw herself into his arms. "You came back," she whispered against his chest, "just like you promised." "Always," he replied, holding her tightly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though the bruise on her cheek told another story. "They captured me at the canyon. The Texan recognized me from descriptions and realized I was worth more alive than dead. They brought me straight to Vernon, who decided a forced wedding would solve his problems." Marshal Davis approached as his deputies led a still struggling Holloway away. "Miss Caldwell, you're a brave woman. Your testimony, combined with the ledger evidence and several witnesses who have already come forward, will ensure Holloway faces justice." "Thank you, Marshal," she said sincerely. "What about the men he hired, the Texan?" "Already in custody," Davis assured her. "Tried to slip out the back when we arrived, but my deputies were waiting." As the excitement died down and the shocked guests began to disperse, Quentin kept his arm firmly around Sophia's waist, unwilling to let her go even for a moment. "Your family," he said suddenly. "They should know you're safe." Marshal Davis sent a telegram before we left Cheyenne, she told him. They're on their way to town now. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Vernon Holloway and his accomplices were transported to Cheyenne to await trial. Sophia's family arrived, her father embracing her with tears of joy and relief. James Caldwell was a sturdy man with the same green eyes as his daughter, and he clasped Quentin's hand with overwhelming gratitude when Sophia explained how he had saved her life. "We owe you everything, Mr. Blackwood," Caldwell said earnestly, "if there's ever anything I can do to repay you." "No repayment necessary, sir," Quentin replied honestly. "Your daughter's safety is reward enough." But as the Caldwells prepared to return to their ranch, Quentin found himself facing an unexpected hollow feeling at the thought of Sophia leaving. They had shared so much in such a short time: danger, trust, and something that had grown between them that he could no longer deny. The evening before her planned departure, he found Sophia standing alone on the hotel's veranda, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant orange and gold. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, joining her at the railing. She smiled, her face finally free of the tension that had marked it since the day he pulled her from the river. "It reminds me of the sunsets at your ranch. I miss watching them from your porch." The simple admission gave him courage. You could see them again, anytime you wanted. She turned to face him, hope flickering in her eyes. "What are you saying, Quentin?" He took her hands in his, suddenly nervous despite all they'd been through together. "I'm saying that these past weeks, despite all the danger and fear, have been the most alive I've felt in years. You brought something back to me that I thought was gone forever when Emma died." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "Quentin, I'm not asking for promises," he continued quickly. "I know you've just escaped one unwanted marriage. The last thing you need is another man making claims. But I want you to know that my home is open to you whenever you wish to visit, and if someday you might consider making it your home too." He left the thought unfinished, afraid of pushing too far, too fast. Sophia squeezed his hands. "When Vernon pushed me into that river, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was beginning. You didn't just save me from drowning, Quentin, you showed me what real strength and honor look like, what love could be." The word hung between them, precious and fragile. "I'm not ready for promises either," she continued softly. "But I know that when I think of the future, you're in it. Is that enough for now?" He smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. "It's more than enough." The next morning, instead of saying goodbye, Quentin found himself riding alongside the Caldwell wagon, accepting James's invitation to visit their ranch. As they traveled, Sophia rode beside him, occasionally reaching across to touch his hand or simply sharing a smile that held the promise of tomorrow. 2 months later, with summer in full bloom across the Wyoming territory, Quentin stood on the porch of his cabin, watching a rider approach from the south. His heart quickened as he recognized Sophia's graceful posture in the saddle. They had seen each other regularly since the events of that spring. Quentin had helped the Caldwells rebuild their ranch operations, using his own good credit to secure new breeding stock. With Holloway's criminal empire dismantled, many who had suffered under his predatory loans found themselves freed from impossible debts, the Caldwells included. Sophia had flourished in the aftermath, helping her father modernize their ranching methods and even writing occasional pieces for the territorial newspaper about the importance of honest business practices. Her ordeal had transformed her from a dutiful daughter into a woman who knew her own mind and spoke it clearly. As she dismounted and walked toward him, Quentin was struck again by her beauty, not just her physical appearance. Though the summer sun had brought out golden highlights in her brown hair and a healthy glow to her skin, but the inner strength that radiated from her. "You're early," he said, smiling as she climbed the porch steps. "Wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "I couldn't wait," she replied simply, stepping into his outstretched arms. "I have news." He raised an eyebrow questioningly. "The territorial governor has asked me to speak at a conference in Denver next month," she explained. "About land rights and protecting small ranchers from predatory lenders. They want first-hand accounts of Holloway's methods." That's wonderful, Quentin said proudly. Will your father accompany you? Sophia shook her head, a mischievous glint in her eye. Actually, I was hoping my husband might. For a moment, Quentin wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Your husband, she took a deep breath. If I had won by then, yes. If a certain rancher I know were to ask me a particular question, that is. Joy surged through Quentin as he understood her meaning. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee, still holding her hands in his. Sophia Caldwell, from the moment I pulled you from that river, my life has never been the same. You brought light back into my world when I thought it would always be dark. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears shimmered in her eyes as she nodded. Yes, Quentin Blackwood. 1,000 times yes. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love that had grown between them over the past months. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. No river this time, he murmured. Just us and whatever future we build together. I wouldn't have it any other way, she replied, sealing the promise with another kiss. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Caldwell Ranch, with Marshall Davis standing as Quentin's best man and Sophia's brother Samuel giving her away. The celebration afterward brought together both their communities' Quentin's ranch hands mingling with neighboring ranchers, townsfolk from Clearwater raising glasses to the couple whose story had become something of a legend in the territory. As the sun set on their wedding day, Quentin led Sophia away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. Happy? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. More than I ever thought possible, she answered, leaning back against his chest. Do you ever think about how different things might have been if you hadn't been tracking that mountain lion that day? If you hadn't seen what Vernon did? Sometimes, he admitted. But then, I remember something my grandfather used to say, that the important turns in our lives rarely announce themselves. We only recognize them looking back. She turned in his arms to face him. Well, looking back, I'm grateful for every moment, even the terrifying ones, because they led me to you. As they rode back to Quentin's ranch the next day, their ranch now, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The river that should have been her end had instead carried her to a new beginning. The man who had tried to silence her had instead set her on a path to finding her voice. And the cowboy who had refused to let her return to danger had given her something she'd never truly had before, the freedom to choose her own destiny. 5 years later, Quentin and Sophia Blackwood stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their 3-year-old twins, Emma and James, playing in the yard under the watchful eye of Maria. The ranch had prospered under their joint management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Sophia's articles on ranching and women's rights now appeared regularly in newspapers as far away as San Francisco, and Quentin had recently been asked to serve on a territorial commission for fair land use practices. Another letter from the publisher in New York, Quentin said, handing Sophia an envelope that had arrived with the weekly mail. Still trying to convince you to write a book about our story, she smiled, leaning against him as she opened the letter. They're persistent, I'll give them that. You should consider it, he encouraged. Your articles have already helped so many women stand up for themselves. Sophia glanced up at the man who had become not just her husband but her partner in every sense of the word. Perhaps I will. After all, it's a good story, the cowboy who rescued a bride from a river, then refused to let her return to the man who pushed her. The best part, Quentin said, pressing a kiss to her temple, is that it's still being written every day. As the sun set over the Wyoming hills, painting the sky in the colors that had first brought them together on his porch years ago, Sophia knew he was right. Their story hadn't ended with a wedding or even with the children who had followed. It continued to unfold with each sunrise, each challenge faced together, each quiet moment of understanding that passed between them. The river that had nearly claimed her life had instead carried her to shores she could never have imagined, to strength she didn't know she possessed, to love deeper than she'd believed possible, and to a future as vast and promising as the western horizon.